Good morning. Winterview back again with another brief dialogue for his dear friend. That's right, Annastacey. Early morning dialogue. Winterview going to try and catch a wave. Yesterday that was unsuccessful. Wave gods not favouring X. So X is praying to a different god today. This dialogue is a perennial favourite of the seeker. This is on suffering. Why do I suffer? Can I end my suffering? Will enlightenment / liberation end the suffering? What difference will it make to my suffering, if any? Good question. Let's explore, investigate, explain. Sounds like an essay question, which it might be. Okay, so suffering. Let's give some definitions. Pain and suffering. These are my definitions, which means they're the absolute 100% correct definitions, and every other definition is incorrect and wrong and stupid. I'm just kidding, of course. But here we go. Rudimentary definitions. Let's get them down. Pain. Let's call pain that intense, in the moment, reaction to aversive stimulus. Put hand on cactus. Pain. Put hand on stovetop. Pain. Hit hand with hammer. Pain. Let's go a bit more emotional. Girlfriend says, I don't like you anymore. Pain. Boyfriend says, I don't like you anymore. Pain. Bank says, you're overdrawn, in debt. You owe us a lot of money. Pain. What else? Your boss says, your work performance is not up to the expected standard that we employed you for. Pain. We're firing you, sorry. Pain. There we go. So you can see that the pain is the in the moment thing, the reaction, the knee jerk, the reflex, the ow, that hurt. Suffering is where it gets a little more interesting. Now this is a approximate definition. Suffering is quite hard to define, to be totally frank. Suffering is the narrative and story that builds around the pain. But it's not just that. You could say that let's say you might have a disease, a condition where the pain is chronic. So there's pain, like ongoing. But the suffering is a little bit different from chronic pain. The suffering is the narrative, the I don't want to be too mean to people in pain, but it's more like the woe is me story. And there can be very, very reasonable reasons for the woe is me. I'm not trying to suggest that it's whiny, inappropriate continuation, but in some cases it certainly is. But the suffering is in some ways the mind building into the narrative of limitation, and I'll never make it, and I'm wasting my life, and I have a big problem which I'll never get over, and no one loves me. That kind of narrative is where the suffering builds in. Suffering can take many levels of intensity. It doesn't necessarily have to be huge suffering of loss of friends and families' lives and chronic diseases and poverty, etc. It could be just, like a little quibble at the back of your mind that you never quite got. You didn't get the office chair that you had your heart set on. Someone else got it, or they got the corner suite and you got the next one along, which is really annoying. And there's like a little suffering now. Like, why didn't I get it? My life will never be complete now. It can take on many grades. It could be an immense magnitude. It could be the death of a family member, a spouse, a son or a daughter, or a parent or best friend or something, and after the initial pain of the loss, there's the suffering, the ongoing story in the mind, you might even say. That why did it happen, and why didn't it happen to me, and why them, and it was unfair, that kind of narrative. And so where does the quest for enlightenment fit into this? Well, interestingly, pain is much easier to tolerate, much easier than suffering. Suffering wears you down. It really grinds the apparent individual down over time, and is therefore a more powerful driver, you could say, of seeking. If I can just get rid of this suffering, I'll be great. And most of the questions around enlightenment, liberation, in many ways are in a way saying, how do I get rid of this suffering? And the ultimate, you might say, fantasy or goal is that it all goes away totally, and is replaced with 100% bliss. Wouldn't that be wonderful? Just this 100% loving, golden, pink light of lightness that fills your heart with an eternal joy. And there are some quarters which present liberation as that, as the eternal unfolding, outpouring of love endlessly. So maybe we should get real, a little bit realer about liberation. Liberation, going back to my original definition, and there might be other definitions out there, because we are talking conceptually at the end of the day, is the dissolution, the end, the cessation. Pulling out the big words this morning. This is pre-coffee too, by the way. Of the imagined or apparent individual self. The key is the apparent, the imagined. It's not the dissolution of the self, because the self never has existed, never existed, isn't existing presently. It just feels like it is. So when the self energy, self in process, if you prefer that, ceases, then all there is what's going on, what's happening, this, if you like. So does that mean that pain will end? Well, clearly not. Clearly not. Let's start with pain. If hitting your finger with a hammer hurt like the bejesus before liberation, we'll say before, as if that's a thing, then it certainly is going to feel just as sore afterwards. That is something that is unavoidable. That is pain. If your girlfriend dumps you because you're a lazy blob and you're boring and whatever, and she's met someone much better, that is going to hurt. Liberation or no. So that is coming back to one of the core ideas here about liberation, enlightenment, in that before liberation, it feels that I'm the body, I'm something to do with this body, so it's all framed around the body and the relationships of the body and all that. It's all very body oriented, body focused. We don't tend to ask about what's going to happen to the clouds after liberation, but it's an equally valid question. So everything before, you could say, liberation is body focused. So the reason I'm talking about pain in particular, physical pain, is because that is the most common thing that the mind will throw up questions, in terms of questions. So what if you have you could have a psychological problem. You could have, what's a good one? Well, what about obsessive compulsive disorder? It's fairly prevalent in our mental health setting where I work. It's not fatal, but it is extremely disruptive to a person's life. It can be painful. There can be chronic hand-washing behaviours and scrubbing the body, etc. It's certainly disruptive, though. Really takes up a lot of time, and there's a suffering that goes along with that. Not all the time, but very often there is. So the pain could be the chronic hand-washing behaviours, and the suffering is, oh, why is this happening to me? Please will it stop? I just want it to go away. I just want to get on with my life. That kind of thinking. Noting that it's body-oriented. It's all very focused on the body. So the seeker of enlightenment inevitably will focus on the body as they identify being the body or as the body. So the questions are typically around the body. So where was I? Sort of tangentialed there. Went on a tangent. So pain after liberation certainly continues. But what about the suffering? This is where it gets interesting. Can suffering still occur? The answer, oh, you're not going to like this. Yes, it can. Suffering can continue. It can continue. There's a few reasons, you might say. The first is that anything can happen. There's no particular rule or regulation. There's no code that says this is a certainty after liberation, that it'll definitely be this way. The second point is that the energy of self wrapped up in the body and the long-term conceptualizing around I'm the body, etc., can continue on for quite a long time after the dissolution of self. It can pop back, you might say, or it can oscillate somewhat. And it's a very surprising thing to discover that. It's often presumed that liberation is this mark in the sand where it is entirely different from what was before in every way, but it's not necessarily every way. There is the fundamental realization, of course, that is irreversible. You can't not realize it after it's realized. That's another dialogue. But old habits and patterns of thought and action and behavior that are locked into the body. Remember, the body has nothing to do with liberation. The ideas around it can continue. And finally, the third point, that is, that the suffering can ease off significantly. It can indeed. And that would be more in line with suffering that is intensely personal and narrative, that trying to think of an example where there is no self, that suffering could not realistically continue. I'd say more in line with the self-esteem style of suffering. There's something wrong with me, I'm no good. That kind of suffering is quite particular, a particular mind pattern, which is extremely hard to sustain post-liberation, you might say. Post-liberation. I'm perhaps giving these differences artificial distinctions that don't really exist, but I'm trying to think of the accounts and personal experience as well. It will help. That will help. I understand that suffering is a key driver for people who are seeking, or so-called people who are seeking so-called liberation. It's a key driver. It's yet another thing to stop pain, to stop suffering. The message I'm giving, I suppose, is a little bit disappointing. But I feel like there's a nice reasoning behind this. And most of my dialogues at the end of the day are for the mind. They're conceptual in nature, and they are targeted at the thinking, so to speak, the thinking energy, if you like, the thoughts, the thoughting. They're not targeted to shift a person from unenlightenment to enlightenment. That's ridiculous. But seeking is a confusing and difficult process that naturally arises for imagined people, etc. And it is confusing because it's paradoxical, it's strange, it's mysterious, it can be very difficult, and it can reach very fevered dimensions of a suffering in and of itself. When will enlightenment happen to me? Why don't I get this? And feel awful. So my dialogues ultimately are more targeting conceptualizations, ideas around liberation, enlightenment. So this is just yet another framework to smooth out the rough edges of thinking. But shifting on to the next part of this dialogue is that one thing that suffering reveals to us, or the interesting thing that suffering reveals, is that there's something wrong, in quotes, well, not in quotes, there just is something wrong with this appearance, with this world. There must be something wrong with it. That's the baseline, you could say, of the suffering, down lower in the sort of unconscious level. What is wrong with this world? And then it's very easy with that core, we'll say, belief or perspective to really look at the world and find problems. It's so simple. I'm driving on a road that is so poorly maintained. Maybe the council has no money, maybe they're lazy, maybe the traffic's too heavy for the road. I don't know. But I find a problem anywhere I look. There's a problem. Everywhere I look, I can find a problem. So the core process, you might say, mentally, that's going on is there's something wrong with this. And therefore, if you go down a step further, there's a very primitive, underlying, almost infantile, you could say, belief system that the world should be perfect, should be amazing. And then you can find some deeply buried, probably for a lot of people, religious ideas that if there was a God, there would be no suffering. What kind of God would make an awful world? All those very primitive childhood beliefs can be lurking around even as adults. Why is there war? Why is there hunger? Why are there orphans? All those kinds of belief, which is saying this world is a problem. This world is filled with problems. I couldn't couldn't spare you the time to break down all the many, many ways that we can think of problems. I mean, they're just possibly infinite. I don't know if there are infinite, but possibly infinite ways to frame it. So the core question is very simple. What is wrong with this? What is the problem with this? You'll find very simply, this is something you might want to introspect on, I don't know, but the problem really, in essence, must be something to do with the way I'm framing or thinking about this. It has to be that, because without my thinking and framing, all I have is something happening. I don't even know what. So therefore, down deep in the cognitive, conceptual part, there's also something that suggests I know what's going on. This world is something that I know about, and I don't like it. I know it, and I judge it. So conceptually, the knowingness, which, if you really think about it, this is going to sound a little bit painful to hear, is arrogant. That I know. This is something I know. I definitely know what's going on, and I have the ability to judge it as wrong, you could say. So there's the core narcissism, you might even want to say it like that, or vanity, if you prefer, of mind. The mind knows. The mind judges. I know that this is wrong. I know what the world is, and I know that it's wrong. There's the sort of core down there. And there's the core of suffering. That is the core of suffering, in essence. But in saying that, that belief can continue. Why not? Why not? Could you be liberated and have that continue? Sure. Sure. Why not? Liberation is the dissolution of the apparent self. The apparent self. Mental whatevers, habits, patterns, whatever you want to call it, can continue. Absolutely. No, because no one's, let's not forget, ultimately, no one's doing it. No one's doing that. There's no one in control of it. There could be the loss of self and crappy mental patterns continue. And pain can continue. Etc., etc., and so on and so on. Okay, so coming to the end of my drive. Not sure what the waves are doing. What is the core understanding? I just talked and talked and talked. I guess at the end of this dialogue, there's a lot of mystery and flexibility about pain and suffering that the mind might be quite rigid on in the seeking. Yes, I'm suffering. Yes, it will end when I'm enlightened. And if if it's still there, I'm not enlightened. That kind of thinking. Or if I see someone who says they're enlightened and they're in pain or suffering, they're not enlightened. All those monolithic, absolute, rigid belief structures. So this is once again a loosening of thought, beating it with a meat tenderizer to make it more soft and flexible. Having a powerful massage of your rigid thinking structures. That's what this is all about. Now maybe should be my marketing angle. Yes, that sounds good. Thought masseuse. Alright, waffling now. Apologies. Once again, thank you for listening, and as usual, comments are very welcome.